In the narrative fiction of the entire level that's described in the level design document of this abandoned mill building, we have to eventually reach the bridge and cross the bridge. That's the player's ultimate objective in the level, is to escape the level. So the bridge operates on hydroelectric power from the mill. And seen here in this image in the viewport is this thing we're calling the gear machine. It's the thing that is missing a crucial part. It needs to supply power to the bridge. So right here, we're going to need one actor, which we're going to call the gear machine. It's essentially a child of the interactive parent actor. And to make it work, because this thing will be kind of in a lock state, non-operational, not supplying power anywhere else in the level, we're going to need a second actor, which we're calling our gear wheel. And the gear wheel is really just a parent, not a parent rather, but a child of the key actor. So the gear wheel essentially unlocks the gear machine that restores the gear machine to an operational state, which restores power to the bridge. So we're going to need two actors to create at this point. The first actor we will create to represent the gear machine will be placed right here where there's this receptacle in the world. It sort of indicates to the player there's a piece missing. So we're going to build that actor from a child class of the BP Interactive Parent. So I'll right click here, create child class, and call this BPC Gear Machine. So right here, we're going to open this up. We have most of our core functionality in this actor by default. So we're going to add a visual component to represent what the part of the machine looks like when the gear wheel is actually installed. And for this component, we'll just choose the gear that I made a proxy gear. Again, I just modeled this out of geometry brushes in the editor. I'm just going to rotate this mesh here so it aligns with everything else. Move the UI text render component here, compile and save that. Now I'm going to place an instance of this where it belongs in the level. So just drag the gear machine here to fit where it would be placed by the player, where the gear wheel will be placed by the player into the machine. So that's what it will look like when it's been repaired, when the wheel is installed where it needs to be. Now let's go back to the actor and let's change some of the default settings here. So is locked, we want to be true by default, because essentially you can't operate the machine, so to speak, until you find the gear wheel. Let's change a few of these text variables. We want replace gear wheel, telling the player what to do when they approach the machine. And let's say when the player actually has the gear wheel, let's put place gear. Actually, let's do this. If it's locked, we want the player to know what they need to do, what the problem is. So we'll say missing gear wheel. So they know that there's a part missing. Because again, we don't have any UI for our game at this point. This is highly basic proto stuff, really. So we need to convey as much as we can with simple prompts when the player approaches some of the interactive moments of the game. So I'll compile and save that. Let's go into the event graph. We don't need these. Oh, one other thing we need to do is the static mesh shouldn't actually be showing when the player hasn't replaced the gear wheel, because it represents where the final location of the gear wheel is in the machine. So we're going to hide this by default at the start. Let's just do hidden in game. So in other words, when the player approaches the gear machine and puts the wheel, they interact with it, they put the wheel in place, it will look like this. But if I hit G to show the game view, we can see that it's actually going to be missing. We're just hiding it from the player and then revealing it when they interact. So let's go to the event graph again and do the scripting we need to do here. And we're going to override the custom event we created in the parent class here. So this controls when things happen. Again, what happens when the player actually puts the gear in place and interacts with it that way. So we're going to grab the isLocked variable, do a branch check here. And so when locked is true, we wanted to show the lock text on our text render component. So we'll do set text, and we're just going to grab lock text and connect that there. And we're going to use the static mesh here, and we're going to set hidden in game into false. In other words, we're going to reveal the gear when the player interacts with this actor when it is in an unlocked state. And then we'll, at this point, hide the interact UI because there's nothing left to tell the player to do. I'll compile and save this. So after these are in place, when this interaction chain happens here, when it's not locked, we could add other events here that reference other actors in the level. So we want to turn lights on, make things move, have some kind of visual feedback for the player, maybe sounds that they've actually turned on the power and the mill's running and the gears are moving. And we'll just do a quick test of the gear machine. So I move closer to it and it says inspect it. I pressed interact and it tells us we're missing the gear wheel. If I move away, the UI disappears. If I move close, it will always say missing gear wheel now because we already were told this information. We don't need to re-inspect it. So now we need to create our level designer placeable gear wheel for the level that represents sort of an item the player picks up and then installs in this machine. So this is extremely simple. We're just going to be using the BP key parent as the parent. We're going to make a child of this. We'll call it BPC gear wheel. We'll open this up and there's very little to do. There's actually no scripting to do in this actor. We just need to have a visual representation that shows that it's a gear wheel, and we need to change the text render UI, so to speak, in the instance of the actor. So right here, I'm just going to make this the gear wheel again, the same gear wheel that we used earlier. I'll choose the white color again so it actually matches the one that looks like it's been installed in your machine. The text render component a little bit. Actually, since there's only one gear wheel, we can really just change the text right here. We'll just call this take gear wheel. We'll compile and save that. So I'm going to place it, well, just for testing purposes, I'm going to place this near the machine. And all we do here is we set the actors to unlock. The actor is the gear machine. Now we'll quickly test the gameplay here. To reiterate, I go back, I inspect the gear machine, it says I'm missing a gear wheel. I find elsewhere in the level this gear wheel, it tells me to take it by interaction. It disappears looking like I picked it up. Now if I go back to the gear machine, it knows we've found the gear wheel, so it says place the gear that we supposedly have on our person. So we interact and the gear is in place and we've repaired the machine.